So a lot of people have approached me regarding banking, and I'm happy to make banking introductions when feasible. But another question that I get is, would it just be easier to create my own offshore bank? And the answer is no, it would not be. It would be wildly, wildly, wildly difficult to do it, but it's possible. And I've seen a lot of ICO companies with the capital doing it. And it generally requires four steps, right? And this is really high level, and I'm happy to discuss sort of the details with anybody. But from a high level standpoint, you've got four steps. First step is obtaining a permit to organize. Okay, any locale, and we're talking offshore banking, right? So we're talking Caribbean and other areas. So let's take Dominica for an example. That's a popular place to start a bank. Requires a permit to organize. So that requires incorporating in that location, and then obtaining a permit to organize from the financial authority of that jurisdiction. And that permit to organize is much like a licensing process, right? It requires a business plan, draft financials, proof of capital, background checks, so on and so forth. And generally speaking, you can expect to need about $1 million free capital to obtain a permit to organize. So that's step one. Step two, once you have the permit to organize in hand, is build out your compliance program. And I don't care where you are, you need a robust AML KYC program, else you're not going to be able to get to step three, which we'll talk about in the beginning. And there's a lot of software out there that's relatively inexpensive, off the shelf, that you can get, which will help facilitate this. But you have to have the procedures, policies in place, and in full, complete format in order to move through the process. Third, and this is the most difficult part about it, is you have to find a correspondent bank. Remember, you're not holding, as an offshore bank, you're not holding funds. You're effectively acting as a banking broker, right? You're banking somewhere else. So for instance, Bank of Nevis is a correspondent bank of Lloyd's of London, right? The Bank of Nevis isn't itself necessarily holding funds on deposit for itself. It's holding funds on deposit at another bank that is, for good reason, more secure, right? Has better credit, if you will. And so the hardest part in all this process is getting that correspondent banking relationship, which usually involves approaching like tier 2 or tier 3 bank and developing a relationship with them. And usually in that process, you're going to have to show net capital of in excess of 1 million, right? In excess of that 1 million that you needed to show the regulators to get the permit to organize. Typically in the $3 to $5 million range is the minimum that you would need in order to get a sound correspondent banking relationship. And that's going to really allow you to operate. Once you've acquired that, you go to step 4, which is your permit to operate, right? Which is going back to the financial regulatory authority in the jurisdiction that you're going to, and getting a full license that would allow you to open up and start business, right? So it's very, it's a very difficult process. It's feasible. Places like Dominica, St. Lucia, it's much easier than others. Belize is another place where it's feasible, and the cost of capital and the capital requirements are lower. When you get to places like Switzerland, stuff like that, it becomes much higher. But your biggest threshold, your biggest hurdle in all of this, right, is getting that correspondent banking relationship. Which the main crux of it, and the main hurdle is just being able to show the net capital that would require you to operate as a bank, that would be effectively on deposit with that correspondent bank. So for a lot of ICO companies, I've seen this become a viable option because they've raised enough money. They don't have a legitimate banking solution, which is a viable problem and a real problem. And so it simply becomes easier to sort of create their own banking relationship, and that bank has value, and that bank can be sold at some later time, or it can be maintained, whatever the situation calls for. But that is offshore banking at a 10,000 foot level and how to start a bank. But if you have questions and want to drill down and get into the details on how to do it and ultimately do it, feel free to reach out. I'm at tracyfirm.com. at@tracyfirm.com is my email. Feel free to hit me up. At the bottom of this video, you can see all my Telegram and all that other stuff too. So feel free to contact me. Happy to discuss offshore banking and how to set up an offshore bank. Talk to you.